and thank you for joining us today for this webinar at the Inner Leadership Conference. As some of you may know, this conference was supposed to happen in real life, but I don't need to share why we've moved it to a webinar format. And thank you so much for joining myself, NAVIN AMARSURIYA, and my good friend XIAN, who's joining us from his office as well. Before we kick things on, I'm just going to share a little bit about the reason for the Inner Leadership Conference existence. Ultimately, all the information that we're filtering in the world is going through our minds. And in order to deal with the vicissitudes of life, to deal with its uncertainties, the cultivation of the mind is a necessary skill today. And in the time of COVID, we find that mental well-being is the predominant, the unintended predominant condition of what the world is experiencing, more so than even the medical side. You know, about 300,000 people have been infected, but there are 7 billion people on the planet that have been mentally affected by COVID as well. And resilience and well-being is so important. So I speak for myself that, you know, my journey into this world is very shallow. I'm a lay person who was interested in the neuroscience behind training the mind, and that's what got me here. But with the little bit that I know and my background working for Singapore's oldest family business and being a part of the 5th generation of an old company, I'd love to share anything that I can with you. I'd like to pass the mic on now to XIAN, who will tell you a bit more about himself and how he comes to Inner Leadership.
Thanks, Nav. So my name is XIAN. Eaton House is my family business. Prior to joining Eaton House, I worked in the US first as an investment banking analyst, and after that I was a hedge fund analyst. So I did that for about 5 years, traveled around the world for another year, and came back to Eaton House. And it's kind of hard to nail down what my JD is, Eaton House. You could say I look after all of the school operations. But yeah, we basically have about 120 schools throughout Asia. I know this is a tough time for everyone in the world. I can speak from this with experience, given that I have about 50 schools in China right now that have been going through lockdown and have been going through the great adventure that is e-learning. And in Singapore, we have about 40 schools. And yes, we've been dealing with the COVID situation as well. I stumbled upon mindfulness by sheer chance, really. I think, quite frankly, it was an ex-girlfriend who sent me a YouTube link. And she said, try this. And I just sat down and listened to the YouTube link, and I found myself experiencing a sense of peace that I just didn't really know existed. And at that point, I had only been a manager, so to speak, for a year in Eaton House. Prior to that, I was managing, I guess you could say, situations in finance. So the decisions are quite clear, quite binary. Buy, or don't do anything. And managing people, there are a lot more options. It's not binary. And I think it was quite a shock for me my first year. And mindfulness really helped me find, I think sometimes people define mindfulness as the space between thoughts. And it really helped me find the space between thoughts to, instead of choosing fight or flight, we are in a difficult situation, to maybe just give you just a little bit amount of space. So I think perhaps there's a mastery level, which is fight, flight, or flow. And maybe there's some days I'm there, some days I'm not. But what I can say is that it's been very helpful to me, and I'm very lucky to have met NAVIN, which has helped me in my journey as well.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what you said about fight, flight, or flow. One of the most beautiful definitions that I've come across is Viktor Frankl's idea that in between a stimulus and a response, there's a very small space. And in that space is your freedom to choose. So I see mindfulness and meditation practice as the art of increasing that space, both in terms of duration and quality. And right before this call, XIAN and I were talking about how some people right now are hugely affected by the COVID crisis. And for example, my family business, which has operations in several industries, there's some which really don't have any revenue, which means that, you know, there's implications to people's jobs and all that. But what XIAN and I would love to bring to you tonight, first and foremost, is a sense of relaxation. Because the beauty about this practice is it allows you to get in touch with the beauty that is the moment, you know, the fact that you're sitting on a comfortable chair, maybe in a nice room, leaning back and listening to this through the earphones that you have, and that all of us here are well fed, and we're not struggling existentially. Well, maybe we are struggling existentially, but not physically. But yeah, we'd love to guide you through a relaxation. And this wouldn't be an inner leadership conference talk if we didn't have a little bit of meditation. So how it's going to work is XIAN and I will do this together. And I will lead the first half, which will be about 5 minutes. And then I will hand it over to him to continue it. And just settle into wherever you are, wherever you may find yourself. Just take a moment to arrive. Really arrive. Arrive in your chair. Arrive in your body. Feel your head resting on your body. Notice your face and relax the muscles in your eyes. Relax the muscles on your cheeks. Let your head gently rest on your shoulders. Notice the sensations in your shoulders. And as you take a breath and exhale, see if you can soften your shoulders just a little. As you soften your body, keep your back straight. Don't overextend it, just gently upright so you can breathe comfortably. And keep your front soft, your heart open. And try and find places of ease, places of opening. Like calm water, gently rippling. Start to notice your chest rising and falling. The rhythm that began from the moment you were born. Notice the pleasure of breathing in. Notice the relaxation of breathing out. Breathing in, you're aware of your breath. And breathing out, you can gently smile. If your mind wanders, gently bring it back to the breath. Soften your hands, soften your feet, and keep your attention gently resting on the breath. Now we will gently move our attention to the next instructions.
I invite you to join me in a little exploration. Look into the center of your heart, and you will find a beautiful garden. The most beautiful garden that you have ever seen. Imagine it. And imagine that you're in your garden of your heart. Walk inside. Notice what you smell. The smell of grass, of dew. Breathe it in and out. And as you walk into your garden, look around and you'll see flowers, shrubs of flowers everywhere. To your left, to your right. So beautiful. Roses, chrysanthemums, orchids of different colors. And as you walk, look around. You don't see most people, but suddenly you see someone in front of you. Find someone in your mind's eye who's easy to love. Doesn't have to be a person, just anyone easy to love. Choose that person. The person's in front of you. Walk up to that person and give the person a flower from the garden of your heart. Notice how the person smiles. Maybe a person laughs. And I invite you to tell this person I love you. I wish that everything will be easy for you. I wish that you will be healthy. I wish that you will be happy. And I wish that you live a life without suffering. And I invite you to thank the person. Take a step back and continue walking at the garden in your heart. And as you walk, you see someone else. Someone who you might see every day that you don't know so well. It could be the receptionist, the security guard, a Grab driver, anyone. And this person's in front of you now. And I invite you to give this person a flower of your heart. Notice how the person thanks you and seems maybe surprised. And tell the person, I love you. I wish that you are happy. I wish that you are healthy. And I wish you live a life without suffering. Notice how the person responds. Notice how you respond. And then take a step back and turn and continue walking. Continue walking around your garden. Breathe in the fresh air and breathe out. And as you walk, you notice someone else in the distance. Someone that you find a little bit harder to love. Could be someone that you just had a difficult discussion with. Is anyone that's difficult to love? Walk towards this person. Reach to get the flower and give this person a flower from your heart. I invite you to tell this person, I love you. I wish that you are well. I wish that you will be happy. I wish a life of ease for you. And I wish that you will live a life without suffering. Notice how you feel. And take a step back. Thank the person. Turn around and continue walking in the garden. As you walk, I invite you to look around and notice that there are flowers everywhere. Flowers to your left, flowers in front of you, as far as the eye can see. Flowers to your right. And I invite you to reach down, pick up flowers, as many as you can, and give them to members of your family. Here's one for you. And the next person, here's one for you. For you. For you. For you. And reach down again. Pick up more flowers. And give them to everyone who you work with. To you. To you. To you. To you. And turn around, and you notice a sea of flowers. There's a flower for everyone in Singapore. There's a flower for everyone in the world, right in front of you. Notice how you feel. And notice how big this garden seems to you now versus when you first came into it. It's the funny thing about your garden inside of your heart. It was always there inside of you. And I invite you to breathe in and let it go. And gently wriggle your toes, your fingers, as you slowly come back into the world. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, XIAN. Yeah, before we get into the nuts and bolts of contemplative leadership, I think XIAN would agree with me if we both have to thank a teacher called Leigh Bressington, who taught us this particular visualization technique on a retreat we both attended. And the retreat was actually hosted by someone who was really, really well known in the technology space in California. And it's quite fascinating how over the last 10, 15 years, meditation and mindfulness have kind of become buzzwords for contemplative practice and its intersection with business and commerce. So the format of this talk is just kind of a free flow conversation between me and XIAN, which we do anyway. So we didn't have to prepare that much. But XIAN, I'd like to ask you, you talked a little bit about your journey getting into mindfulness, and ex-girlfriend introducing you to the concept.
Don't tell my wife.
How have you found the practice useful in a leadership position that you hold, running the Eaton House International Group?
I think we're all dealing with so much. I mean, right now, for example, everyone's like up to here, right? And I think it's quite obvious that everyone's been running scared for a while. And as a leader in this moment of time, you need to be able to manage yourself. And if you don't manage yourself, you can't manage the people around you, because they'll just look at you and go like, who is this guy? And I think I found it to be just a little bit of space, a little bit of magic in the morning. I'm lucky enough that I can, even though I've got two new babies, new twins in my life, I'm lucky enough that I can carve out some time in the morning just to find some space. And if it weren't for that space, the rest of the day it's just an animal house, I guess. I think in terms of education, It's the brave new world. We keep thinking about skills, about knowledge that we can teach our children. And this is a frontier that's quite new in the world of education. Social emotional learning has been around for quite a while. I think those of us who went to school in Singapore, you might refer to this as civics and moral ed, 好公民. I think that was the government's attempt to teach us. But I think the world of education is digging into this new frontier. And as you do the research on mindfulness in schools, you discover that it's important for teachers and to have a practice of their own. If not, they won't be able to teach this to their children. And I believe that as a leader of my organization, I can't ask someone to teach something that I don't believe in, that I don't practice myself. So professionally, I see this useful in several ways. And as a new father, I'm finding, actually, I was just talking to Navin about this. My babies, my twins, they're about 3.5 weeks old. And it's been a journey. And if anyone, yeah, my twins have probably taught me more about mindfulness than any teacher. Because I'll give an instance. When a baby is in your hands and a baby is crying, you didn't do anything to make the baby cry. Maybe you did, but most of the time, you didn't do anything to make the baby cry. And you can't really help but feel like I've done something wrong, that I need to do something to help this baby because my baby's crying. It's kind of hardwired in us. But the reality is that maybe the baby just needs to cry. Maybe what the baby needs right now is something that you can't give right now. And something that is very true, right? It's kind of out of our control. It's quite unpleasant. It's right in our face, in your hands. But yet, you know, why are we so triggered by it? It's something that I feel like it's very relatable to anyone and everyone, even those without children. For example, your boss comes up to you and then starts like telling you things that you don't want to hear. Well, if these are true things, if they're a reflection of reality, then why are you triggered by it? It might be pleasant, it might be unpleasant, it's real. I'm sorry, that was a bit long-winded.
Well, you know, it speaks to the kids in us all. And, you know, they're little kids and they're big kids. But, you know, just building on what you said, so my family's been in the luxury goods industry for almost 150 years. And BP De Silva started as a humble jeweler on the banks of the Singapore River. For most of the time, it was a manufacturing jeweler, so there was always an emphasis on production. And when you create a beautiful piece of jewelry, you have craftspeople that spend decades, sometimes their entire lives, looking at very, very small objects for very long periods of time, concentrating all of their effort and attention on a single imperfection in a gem and polishing it out. And when I reflect on my experience with luxury brands today, there is a tendency for luxury to be presented from a lifestyle perspective. So if we think about influencers, or if we think about people that live a certain particular lifestyle. But for me, luxury has always been interesting from the craft point of view. And when you meet craftspeople, if you took the average marketing manager of a luxury brand and the average craftsperson of a luxury brand, generally the craftsperson would be more content and be more balanced and have better well-being. And I'd always wondered why that was. And as soon as you start getting into the practice of meditation, what it enables you to do is to create that space that XIAN was speaking of, you know, that moment of pause to kind of consider whether this relentless flow of information, maybe from an angry boss or maybe from a child that can't manage his or her emotions, is coming at you. And you don't always get it right. I mean, oh man, I you know, it's very rare that I get it right, but you see that the mind has a tendency to react. And I think that shift from living in a world of constant reaction to one of just taking a step back and taking a single breath and being able to look at, data, or being able to look at a conversation that you're having with your partner or your spouse, it's so powerful. That small space makes a world of difference.
I guess I'm going to bring in one of my interests into the conversation. I do technical diving. I used to do technical diving before I became a father.
Now you're banned by your wife, right? Now you automatic divorce if you go technical diving.
Yeah, technical diving is everything that recreational diving tells you don't do. So going very deep, going into a cave, going into a wreck, and deep. And the first, your physiology does some funny things to you when you're breathing air deep in the water. They call it nitrogen narcosis. Basically, you feel like you're drunk. And the first time I was exposed to this at deeper depths, and of course, as part of the instruction, they stress you out by giving you a problem after problem. And I remember just being that deep and feeling my heartbeat. So that's my body's response to that, to being very deep and breathing air. I can feel my heartbeat. And the first time I heard it, it was like boom, boom, boom. And when these stressors started coming towards me, these problems, like I just freaked out. And you could tell, the instructor later on told me, he said that you look like you were like a fish that was like literally like spasming as I was trying to deal with crisis after crisis. And afterwards, when I came out of the water and I kind of sat there, and I actually had a chance to go underneath a coconut tree and A, calm down, and B, visualize the whole dive. Visualize everything that could go wrong to me. Visualize that sound in my head. And in the afternoon, so the first dive was in the morning. The afternoon, we went out there and we did the same thing again, except harder. And yeah, it was effortless for me. It just felt like a walk in the park. And I think what amazes me is it was the same person, who went for the dive. Pretty much same, if not harder, stimuli that was given to me. But yeah, it's completely different response. And the only thing that changed is something clicked between my ears. And so that's kind of like a very clear example. I think real life and management is not so clear because it's very rare you get very clear feedback that you have done something right or wrong. As a leader, you might not see the result of your actions till years later when someone might just pull you aside and say, hey, by the way, what you said to me really mattered. But yeah, it's just changing what goes on between your ears. There's no price to that.
And, just building on what XIAN said, I'm reminded of this idea. I think it was by economist. I think it was Herbert Nicole or something like that. But he said, in an age of an abundance of information, it leads to a poverty of attention. So when I think of XIAN and his dive and having to manage all these differing sources of information, the amount of oxygen he has left, the technical procedures he's supposed to do, that's a lot to handle. And when we are task loading this onto our brain, if we start worrying about all that information, there's a new task that's added to the brain. So I used to do amateur car racing. And when you're racing a car, you're going really, really fast. And there is also a lot of information and feedback that's happening. What is the grip level of your tires? What's the change in the track condition? What is the suspension setup relative to the corner you're going into? How are you balancing the limits of adhesion? And there's a calculation that you can perform to map out a race and race strategy before. But when you're in the moment and you're dealing with fractions of a second, if you start worrying about a mistake that you made, or if you start getting obsessed with a particular point, what's happening is your brain is just being loaded up with processes and tasks that is diminishing the quality of attention that that I can bring to bear on that situation. So when you think of living in the past or thinking about the future in a strange way, this is also eating away at the processing power that one may have in the present. As I mentioned a bit earlier, I got into meditation primarily because of the advances in neuroimaging technology that happened in about the year 2000 to 2015. I mean, still continuing. And basically, there was a group of psychologists, social scientists, neuroscientists that showed the efficacy of training the muscle of attention. And when you train the muscle of attention, you start to operate very differently in the world. Being able to focus on the correct problem at the correct time, to be able to prioritize in days that no longer have any routine. I mean, they didn't have routine before COVID, and they sure as hell won't have routine after COVID. So, you know, how do you deal with that onslaught of your professional life, your personal life, your relationships? We need tools. And yeah, I like XIAN, I really resonate with that idea of being able to stay in the eye of the storm, or at least try to, for as long as we can.
Yeah, I guess sometimes I struggle between, so it's possible, I feel, to be too mindful and too detached from the world, which I think by default means you're not mindful. So I guess an example being, I think what's commonly talked about, now I've talked about this story, and everyone has a similar story who's ever meditated. You could go through an entire day, be perfectly mindful, and then you go back home, and then you see your wife, and then you get into a shouting match. And sometimes I feel like, I think that's why a lot of practices, there's one which involves more of the heart, and one involves more of the head. Both are kind of helpful. You need both. And yeah, they exist for a reason.
Yeah, you know, when I think about that, I think when I think about that idea of you know, maybe a meditator being somehow better than someone else, I strongly disagree with that concept. I think that all of us are just trying to find ways to live in the world, and there are different tools out there. And one of the dangers of mindfulness practice, in my opinion, is sometimes being too fixated on the outcome. So if we think that, you know, after a 10-minute or hour sit or whatever, that we'll never ever get angry again, you know, that's a kind of expectation that ultimately will lead to disappointment, because we will get angry because we are human beings. And again, being fixated on the outcome makes us lose discovering the joy of the process. And there's a story that I really love, which is about this meditation teacher teaching a group of people how to grow tomatoes. So when he asked them the question, how do you grow a tomato? They talk about, you know, watering the soil, you know, making sure the seed is kept well, fertilizing it. But it was a trick question. A farmer doesn't actually grow tomato. A farmer merely creates the ideal conditions for the seed to sprout. And a farmer will plant hundreds, thousands of seeds, and not all of them will sprout. But what is in his power, what is in his control, is to make sure that the conditions, the soil, the fertilizer, the nitrogen, the amount of sunlight, the location in which is planted, is as optimal as possible to increase the probability of the tomato growing. So when I think of this practice and the word cultivation, I think of the farmer and how the oldest farmers must find a lot of pleasure in just creating conditions and not really worrying about the result, because, you know, over their life, they must have had some bad harvests. So yeah.
Yeah, when I first started my journey, the first time I ever meditated, I ended up in quite a deep spot, I guess purely by accident. And the next day, I remember I rushed to my where I was meditating, and I sat down, and I tried really, really hard to get there, and didn't get anywhere. Seemed quite frustrated. I remember thinking to myself, I think I Googled, why does this meditation stuff not work?
Google has the answer. Guru Google.
Yeah, and I discovered, yeah, it's one of those things, right? There's no status bar. There's nothing. The more you reach for it, the more it moves away. And yeah, like what you said, just looking at it doesn't really help. You just kind of got to settle into it. And I still catch myself a lot in my morning sits, trying to struggle to try and get somewhere. Especially as I've deepened my journey in meditation, you can't help but want to make progress. But in reality, I guess the other day I was thinking to myself, like, why am I doing this? I'm just doing this to create space. I'm just doing this, yeah, to create some level of peace, a level of peace in me that I might not have for the rest of the day. So yeah, I guess it's the raison d'être. It's kind of comes back once in a while. And yeah, like all things, it's kind of useful to ask yourself, yeah, why are you doing it? And if some people, they kind of fall out of it for a while, that's okay. It's always there. You can come back to it.
So I think at this stage, we'll open the floor to questions and answers. You can type it in on your app. I think there's a Q&A box that you can put some stuff in. And we have a question right now, which I'll read out. So, does your mindfulness or contemplation manifest differently at home or with friends compared to in the workplace? And if so, in what ways? Yix, you want to take this one first?
You know, as a leader in my organization, I actually found myself, I thought it was quite interesting. I didn't dare to lead a meditation at work. And I think it's because of maybe whatever preconceived notions I thought that I might have. And I think it was after I watched Chip Ming Tan and Matthew Ricard speak, and they did a 1-minute meditation. I just thought to myself, man, what's the worst that's going to happen in 1 minute? So I did it for the first time at work. And yeah, I mean, like everything went fine. In fact, I found out later on that it so happened that when I led that meditation, it was a group of 5 of us were going to start a meeting, and one of the 5 had just joined the organization. That was about 3 years ago. He's still with us today. And that person, I think, right after I walked out from that meeting, he told his boss, I've never ever met a boss, a leader in the company who starts off a meeting with meditation. I only found out about it later on. And yeah, I realized that this thing that was stopping me from doing this at work, it was just a construct in my head, right? And it wasn't very much a useful construct. I don't do it enough, to be honest. I should do it more. And interestingly, to my immediate family, I find it quite difficult to do it, to lead a meditation. I've never gone there. My wife and I, we have different practices. We might share a practice once in a while. But she likes stuff that's a little bit more heart-based, and I like things that are a little bit more, I guess, nothing-based. But yeah, we do share stuff once in a while. We do share practice once in a while. I think when actually my children were in her belly, we actually would do these meditations with us, with our hands on her belly. And yeah, that was pretty cool because as we did it, I remember we felt a kick. And that was pretty cool. That was pretty wild. But yeah.
So answering the question myself, I think, I think this is a meta skill. So it's kind of like saying, if you run every evening, does that help your walking? And it inevitably will. So mindfulness is a wonderful practice because it's one that underpins a lot of other practices. So for example, if I used to like football a lot as a kid, I could train every day for an hour and get reasonably good at football, but it would help me in that very narrow dimension, that very narrow application. But if I meditated an hour every day, it actually changes a lot of the interactions that I have. And going back to bringing this into the workplace, I'd like to touch on someone that XIAN mentioned, Chad Meng Tan. So Meng was one of the first 100 engineers at Google. And in fact, he's one of the brains that is behind inner leadership itself. And he basically came to realize the value of contemplative practice and brought it to Google it in a way through the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Training Program, which was kind of the first corporate America mindfulness program back in 2006 that really made it big. And, 14 years later, mindfulness is not something that the guy who smokes weed in the corner does. It's something that, is really accepted as an important life skill that contributes directly to the performance of organizations all around the world. So if any of you would like to really deep dive into implementing mindfulness in a corporate setting, I would highly recommend Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, which really pioneered the concept.
I guess this question, in the absence of more questions, I thought one thing that came to my mind was, I guess, the importance of being secular. And I think obviously when you're at work, you need to keep everything secular. And I guess I'm constantly amazed because I think I've been hyper aware of that. And most people actually don't care, it seems. Like some people care, and that's fine. I think I've heard some people say, when I close my eyes, so I think what this person said is like, you want me to think about my head? That's okay. I can think about my head. You want me to touch my head, think about my head? That's okay. You want me to think about nothing? That is not okay, because that's where God comes in, and you are not qualified to talk about God to me. And the first time I kind of heard that, I was like, oh, wow, okay. I guess when someone draws a line in the sand so clear, you have to respect it with something like mindfulness. I often joke about it because like, why are we thinking so hard about what to do when people close their eyes? It's a line in the sand, and I did respect it. What I did do at work was for our principals, I got an instructor who I really respected to actually lead a half-day session with us. And my ask of this instructor was to give everyone kind of like a practical, like experiential exploration of mindfulness. And he, credit to him, the first thing he did was a body scan, except a body scan using touch. So he told everyone, touch your head, think about your head, touch your shoulders, think about your shoulders. And it's like a 10-minute exercise. And I could see in the bodies and just the energy in the room that like everyone was just like so pieced out, just 10 minutes. And then after we did a break and we talked about it, he did a second exercise, which was just thinking about the head, thinking about the eyes, thinking about the nose. So same exercise, but no touch. And it was great. And then the third exercise he did, I think was, I think it was something a bit more meta-based. So it was something more about like a more feeling-based. So similar to what I led everyone through earlier on. And what kind of amazed me was afterwards, one of our principals who's worked with us for about 15 years, he came up to me and he said, so he's about to retire, so he's not a very young man. And he said, XIAN, I've tried to meditate about like 20, 30 years ago and never got anywhere, I gave up. But this half a day, I mean, it's kind of changed me. And he said, I'm going to try every day now to do something. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, cool, okay. And about 6 months later on, I was just talking to him and he just said like, by the way, I'm still doing it. I was like, wow, okay. I didn't really give him a survey to how it helped him at work. I just thought to myself, look, if this helps him keep his sanity, I'm happy.
Mm. And there's a huge body of literature, incredible peer-reviewed scientific studies that look at the efficacy of mental training on the mind and on well-being, and it's just indisputable at this stage that cultivating your mind leads to better outcomes in life. Just to kind of to bring the conversation again to the secular nature of practice, mindfulness, if you think of contemplative practice, people tend to think of, maybe Buddhist meditation or maybe practices in the Brahmanic traditions, in the Bhagavad Gita. But even in Christianity, the Benedictine and Franciscan monks have a great history of contemplative practice, of meditation. The Sufis from Islam also had their own practice. The whole idea of dealing with the world outside by going inside yourself is not unique to any one spiritual tradition. It's not the monopoly of any one theology. And science is just the new kid on the block who suddenly had some cool tools that showed that, hey, this stuff actually works. But really throughout history, we see some of the greatest thinkers, some of the most amazing philosophers, poets, leaders, generals, kings of our times who would go off alone and go somewhere quiet and focus on an object for an extended period of time. And when they were calm enough, then they could take a subject and they could explore that subject with even more depth and clarity than they could otherwise.
Enough on that tone, there's actually another message. So what is the best way to learn and support the meditation and mindfulness journey in your experience? Do you have any good resources, support, or reminders that has been helpful for you and that you can recommend?
So in today's day and age, I would highly recommend meditation apps. Particularly, I would recommend Calm, or Insight Timer. When you start off initially, it's good to have guided meditation. So these meditation sessions are just a couple of minutes long. And usually they'll bring you through the process of how you start to settle your mind. And it's very common that when you first begin, that you will think that your mind is insane. And you will think that you are not a good meditator. This is something that everybody faces, because as soon as you go quiet, you'll notice all the noise that is constantly there. And that's the point at which a lot of people give up. But I really hope that you keep at it and try and find people around you that have similar practice. It could be a yoga practice. It could be someone who really likes archery, or people that use their breath or use their concentration in what they do. And maybe find a community of meditators. Maybe go to a meditation class. There are plenty of mindfulness programs out there. Consistency is the key to success. So if you do a minute a day, try and find a minute a day. You can do it in the bathroom, you can do it when you brush your teeth. Just find the time and lock it in. And the meditation apps are a great tool to get you started on your journey. I'll leave my email address, by the way, in the main chat. So if you have any specific questions, you can always ask me, and I'll try and point you in the right direction. What do you think, Hicks?
I think the only thing I can add is I think different people are really suited to different things, and that's okay. It's one of the beautiful things in life that not all of us are the same. So we've observed how some people are more suited to sound. So there are a ton of, let's say, Tibetan singing bowl meditations out there. If you go on this app called Insight Timer, you can search for a whole bunch of free content that you need to be connected to the internet for. But there's a ton of audio tracks there, stuff on YouTube too. Some people love Yoga Nidra. These are body scan meditations. It works better for them. Some people, like me, like concentration meditation, where you think about one specific part of your body. You can just keep going down the rabbit hole. Some people love metta, which is more heart-based, more feeling-based. And I think it's this exploration of types of meditation that I think is completely fine for everyone to explore. And also, I think the second thing is figuring out kind of what works for you in terms of this routine. So I've observed that whenever let's say I run or I do yoga and then I meditate, it really, really makes a huge difference. And I guess I tried to biohack and over-intellectualize this experience. I guess the too long don't read response is literally I was kind of doing a breath exercise, whether I was running or whether I was doing yoga. I was basically focusing on my breath for probably an hour or so before I started to meditate. And that's why it was already pre-preparing my mind for this, which is how it brought me to deeper places. So yeah, I think it's worth playing around. One of the beautiful things about this is that there's no wrong answer. There's another question from Nesh. It's a long question. I'm going to try and read this and not screw up my pronunciation. If human cognition, for the most part, focuses on changes in an environment, and meditation is the awareness of the status quo when our biological compute is so focused on changes or discrepancy, how important is being aware of our biases, traumas, and programming? How have you explored this conditioning of the observer's awareness in your own practice?
Yeah, this question kind of speaks to the innate understanding of the person observing the phenomena, as I understand it. So it's kind of observing the observer, and you know, it's a fascinating question, because sometimes I wonder how much progress have I really made, and this is the observer trying to observe, you know, myself essentially. Or what are my biases? You know, do I think that, you know, XIAN is a better person just because he has a practice? Is that clouding my judgment of who he is? And you know, it's a slippery slope. I think once you start getting into this world and you start trying to look at the way you see the world, you know, Gandhi had this beautiful saying. He said, the quickest way to change the world is to change the way you see it. And he spoke to the importance of the lens in which we see the world through. Meditation and contemplative practice is about polishing the lens and creating a kind of clarity to see the world. But sometimes that lens, as it becomes more clear, can be observed with polishing marks by our own doing. There are many so-called spiritual practitioners who have inflicted huge damage on their followers because they thought they were enlightened, and they used that power to abuse people who are exploitable. So no one is free from this, and I think you're speaking to that. So as you get deeper into the practice, it requires finer and finer self-observation.
You know, I feel like this question. Okay, so I very early on. So I guess when this journey deepened for me, I had a teacher tell me to keep an insight journal. So some teachers talk about a meditation journal or insight journal. And I guess what he kind of meant was, first, the meditation is meant to be okay, some teachers advocate this. I'm not saying it's like for everyone. He said, you use the practice as something to kind of settle the mind. And then you use that settled mind to evaluate reality. And so when I read that question, I kind of thought about the so-called insights and realizations I've had with that clear mind. And I think what when I read that question, kind of what made me think about was I was lucky enough to hit this deep spot in meditation once, and I kind of I was so deep that when I opened my eyes, I saw how the world was so interconnected. I guess in the Buddhist tradition, they call this dependent origination. And what I saw was and heard was there's a rooster crowing, and that crow echoed throughout the entire valley. And I was just sitting and facing this valley as I finished this meditation, and this like kaboom went off in my head, like, oh, how everything is interconnected. So trying to reel myself back to this reality and to your question, yeah, I think this skill is a precondition that helps us view the reality that we're in. I don't believe it's enough. I think when you talked about our biases, our trauma, our programming, I personally feel trauma is an overused term. I don't mean to demean people who actually have trauma. It's just I hear it said a lot, and I feel like mindfulness can get you some sense of awareness. It can kind of help you not get respond in a very, very bad way, but it's probably not going to actually help you face it. And I think that's where that whole world of psychotherapy, people call friends, etc. I think that's really important, because I'm not sure this in itself is going to be that thing that helps you change from within. I think you need a lot more someone to actually sometimes to do open heart surgery on you, because this might help you realize that you might have an issue, but this might not actually help you solve it per se.
So XIAN, there's a question for you. can you share with us how you've adopted mindfulness in your business? You have a lot of schools. How do you make sure that this happens in your organization and becomes part of the culture?
Oh, darn it. That's a hard question, Nicole. So yeah, I discussed how, I guess when I first looked at this, I realized that it's not something that you can jam down people's throats. I mean, can you think about the number of times that someone said, hey, exercise? um, and so I thought that I wanted to introduce it to people with that instructor and to all of my principals in a setting, so half-day experiential event. And after that, what I did was we looked up for programs around the world that we could adopt. Currently, we're trialing a program by the Contentment Foundation, which is, we did a lot of research behind what matters most to make sure programs work. And the answer was intervening with the teacher. The teacher needs to have a practice of his or her own before the students are going to be able to have any inkling of a practice. So we found that tool, and then we're piloting it out. And of course, COVID's come along, but our schools are still in operation in Singapore. And from what I still hear good things about the program. It's been on trial for the last about 3 months or 2 months. And by the end of the term, we're going to do a check-in on like, hey, look, how's it going? So I guess I wanted something a bit more structured. That's why I had to turn to a tool. In terms of how do I make sure? Man, you know, I'm not going to make sure because again, I can't really control what goes on between people's ears, right? I guess sometimes, you know, I get very impatient when I hear people repeat the same thing over and over again. And then I realized that as a leader in my company, I have to repeat things over and over again for things to really become culture, for things to become something that people realize that management is serious about. And, you know, I'm still a bit shy about talking about my personal practice. So I think this is something that I have to continue working on. And actually, I think touching on the element of shyness in me, I feel like, especially in this time, ironically, where it's most important, I haven't led a meditation in my own company, to my own headquarters. And, you know, it feels like we're playing whack-a-mole all the time. And it's probably something I should do. I do it sometimes. I just haven't done it recently. I think because my own mental state is like...
Yeah. You know, I am aware, everyone, that it's a bit past 8. So we have one last question, and we'll just answer that and we'll let everyone go back to their lives. So has meditation and mindfulness practice changed you as a leader? And can you share that journey? That is a long, long answer. But the short answer is yes. And I think if I can leave everyone with a thought on beginning their journey or taking the first steps, think of your practice when you begin, like tuning a guitar string. If you want to jump into this with both feet right after this call, that's amazing, and I wish you well. But also, you can have so much enthusiasm and effort that can burn out quickly. So think of a guitar string. If you tune it too tight, it snaps. So if you put in too much effort too hard in the beginning, you burn out. If it's too loose, you know, if you leave this idea for another year, you'll never begin as well. So try and keep tuning that balance. You know, maybe start with a minute a day and go from there. And keep in mind that there is no end. The whole point of this is to cultivate and find the beauty in the process. It's the most counterintuitive practice in the world. In a way, you have to start training without an end in mind. But yeah, there's a beautiful way of seeing that will result from it. So be patient and just enjoy the process. Yex?
I guess touching on was it Nesh's? Yeah, Nesh's earlier point. I think mindfulness kind of was a great self-reflection tool. And I kind of, it brings to mind one of the insights I had one day. I don't know why, but when I was reaching one of these deep places, and I just kind of realized that I felt a lot of, I guess, I don't know what the word is, guilt, sadness, unhappiness, particularly around all the people that I had to ask to leave the company at some point. I think as any manager, any leader of an organization, at some point you've had to have a difficult conversation with someone. And that conversation for you is probably the worst conversation you have that day. And to the other person is probably the worst conversation that person will have probably in his life, maybe, potentially. And in that moment where I realized that I still felt a lot of sadness around this, I kind of visualized this thing where I thought of everyone that I'd ever asked to let go. And I kind of thanked them for serving with us, thanked them for teaching me. And I thanked them one after another. And I think when that practice was over, I felt actually like a weight was taken away from me. So I guess to your question about how it's kind of helped me, it's definitely been an immense self-reflection tool. On occasions, it can lead to change, like this. On probably most other occasions, what it will do is just to help me avoid making god-awful mistakes. Because like, how often do you make great mistakes when you go into fight or flight mode, right? Like, I think all of us remember probably the dumbest things you've ever done were probably in that mode. So I think it's kind of helped in that regard. And I think especially in this time right now where everyone is completely stressed out. When people talk about unprecedented, this is one of the few rare times it is pretty much unprecedented. And you need to make good decisions at this point of time. And anything that can help you get any kind of mental space, it's there for you. It's just whether you want to pick it up or not. I think the last question is from Nicole. And it's how is meditation helping you with your new babies? Has it helped? I think I was talking about how my babies have been teaching me about, I guess, it's not really good or bad, it just is. When a baby's crying, it just is. You didn't make the baby cry, baby's just crying. But I think in terms of, one of the things that's pretty cool is, so I do a lot of skin-on-skin contact because my wife makes me do skin-on-skin contact with my babies. So what it is for people without children or who haven't heard about this hippie term before is basically I have to take off my shirt, baby doesn't have a shirt on, and then we're doing chest-on-chest, skin-on-skin contact. It can sometimes lead to some very odd interactions with your baby where your baby frantically looks for a nipple to suck. You know, sorry, bro. I mean, I got nothing for you. I mean, again, mindfulness. I can't help you. When my babies aren't hungry and looking for milk, and they kind of just turn their head and their ear is against my chest, and I think they can hear my heartbeat, and that assures them, and I can feel their heartbeat, and that is pretty cool. And that's one of those moments where I don't really need to be meditating, but I know I'm mindful, and I'm totally in the present. And yeah, you are very aware that, you know, talk about impermanence, right? Your babies only are your babies the way how they are today. And so that's been pretty cool. It's been a journey, and I'm gonna say that, you know, between a confinement nanny and mindfulness, pick the confinement nanny. I think it's been a wild ride.
So from XIAN's babies to kids that some of you may or may not have, to the inner child inside you, both XIAN and I really hope that you continue your practice and yeah, get started, get going, just get your foot in the baby pool and have fun. And it's a long road, but a very, very worthwhile one. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining the Inner Leadership conference today and for participating in this really small event. We really appreciate your support and hope that you can bring some of these ideas to the rest of the world. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Good night. Bye.